I never thought that a wedding invitation, or rather, not receiving one, could completely change my life. When I discovered that everyone in my family had been invited to my cousin Emma's wedding except me, I felt like I'd been stabbed straight through the heart. But what I uncovered afterward was even more shocking than this betrayal. It turns out Emma wasn't my cousin at all. She was my twin sister that I never knew existed. And our lives were so eerily similar, it was terrifying. Please comment and let me know where you're watching from, because this story will make you question everything you believe about your own family. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 27 years old. I work as a freelance graphic designer from my small apartment in Portland, Oregon. I've always felt like the odd one out in the Mitchell family, the one who never quite fit in, who was always forgotten at family gatherings or left out of important conversations. My parents, Nancy and Robert Mitchell, never made me feel unwanted exactly, but there was always this underlying sense that I was somehow different, somehow less important than everyone else. That Tuesday afternoon in March, I was working on a logo design for a local coffee shop when my phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother, Jake. "Are you going to Emma's wedding?" Mom said to wear navy blue. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Emma's wedding? What wedding? I had no idea what he was talking about. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed back, "What wedding?" "I haven't heard anything about a wedding." Jake's response came immediately. "Wait, you didn't get an invitation?" "It's next Saturday at the Riverfront Garden. Everyone's talking about it. I thought you knew." The words on my screen seemed to blur as a cold dread settled in my stomach. Everyone knew about Emma's wedding except me. Everyone had been invited except me. I felt like I was going to be sick. I called my mother right away, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Mom, Jake just told me about Emma's wedding. Why didn't I get an invitation?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear my mother's discomfort through the phone. "Oh, Sarah, honey." Linda said it was going to be a small ceremony, just immediate family and very close friends. You know how these things are. Just immediate family. The words echoed in my head like a death sentence. I was Emma's cousin. We'd grown up together, played together as children, gone to the same schools. If I wasn't immediate family, then what was I? But Mom, I am immediate family. Emma and I have known each other our whole lives. My mother's voice became strained, almost desperate. "Sarah, please don't make this into a big thing. Linda has her reasons, and we need to respect that." I hung up the phone feeling more confused and hurt than I'd ever felt in my life. Something was very wrong here, and I needed to find out what it was. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to my Aunt Linda's house, my mind racing with questions and my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and desperation. Aunt Linda lived in a beautiful Victorian house about 20 minutes from my apartment. When I knocked on the door, she took a long time to answer, and when she finally did, her face immediately fell when she saw me standing there. "Sarah," she said, her voice tight with barely concealed irritation, "what brings you by?" I could see Emma's car in the driveway, which meant she was home, probably upstairs planning her wedding that I wasn't invited to. "Aunt Linda, I need to ask you about Emma's wedding. I just found out about it from Jake, and I'm confused about why I wasn't invited." Linda's face hardened, and she crossed her arms over her chest in a defensive posture. "Sarah, dear, don't make this your own thing." Emma wanted a small, intimate ceremony with only the people who matter most to her. I'm sure you can understand that. The people who matter most to her. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. But Aunt Linda, Emma, and I have always been close. We're family. Linda's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Sometimes, Sarah, we have to accept that we're not as important to people as we think we are. Emma has made her choices, and we need to respect them. I just nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I tried to speak. There was something in Linda's eyes, something that looked almost like guilt or fear, but I was too hurt and confused to process what it might mean. I walked back to my car feeling like my entire world had been turned upside down. As I was pulling out of the driveway, I glanced up at Emma's bedroom window and saw something that made my blood run cold. Through the window, I could see Emma sitting on her bed with an old photo box open in front of her. She was holding up a photograph, and even from this distance, I could see that it was a picture of a little girl who looked exactly like me at that age. But I was absolutely certain I'd never owned the outfit the girl in the photo was wearing. Who was this child? And why did she look so much like me? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph in Emma's hands, the image of a little girl who could have been my twin. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through years of memories, looking for clues I might have missed. The more I thought about it, the more strange coincidences I began to remember. Emma and I shared the same birthday, July 26th. Our family had always joked about what a funny coincidence it was, how we were birthday twins, even though we were cousins. We were both left-handed, both allergic to shellfish, both had the same unusual habit of writing with our paper turned at a sharp angle. We'd always laughed about these similarities, attributing them to genetics and spending so much time together as children. But now, in the dark silence of my bedroom, these coincidences felt less funny and more significant, disturbing even. I grabbed my laptop and started searching through Emma's social media profiles, something I'd never really done before because we saw each other regularly at family gatherings. What I found made my hands shake as I scrolled through her posts. Emma worked in marketing and specialized in brand design. I was a graphic designer who focused on web design. She loved analog photography as a hobby. I had the same passion and even used the same vintage camera model. She was dating a software developer named David. I had just broken up with a programmer named Daniel 3 months ago. She had posted a photo last month showing a small scar on her chin from a childhood accident. I had an identical scar in the exact same place. The similarities were becoming impossible to ignore, and yet they seemed too bizarre to be anything more than coincidence. I screenshotted several of Emma's posts and saved them to a folder on my desktop, though I wasn't sure what I planned to do with them. Sleep finally came sometime after 3 a.m, but it was restless and filled with dreams of 2 little girls who looked exactly alike. The next day, I decided to visit my mother and try to get more information about my birth and early childhood. Mom was in her garden when I arrived, tending to her roses with the careful attention she'd always given them. "Sarah, honey, what a nice surprise," she said. But her smile seemed forced, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Mom, I wanted to ask you some questions about when I was born. I'm working on a family tree project for a client, and I realized I don't know many details about my early life. It was a lie, but I hoped it would get her talking without raising suspicions. My mother's hand stilled on the rose bush, and I noticed her breathing become slightly labored. "What kind of details do you need, sweetheart?" Her voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the tension underneath. "Well, which hospital was I born at? Were there any complications during the birth? Did you have me naturally or by C-section?" These were normal questions any daughter might ask her mother, but Mom's reaction was anything but normal. She set down her gardening shears and turned away from me, busying herself with deadheading flowers that didn't need it. "You were born at St. Mary's Hospital. It was a normal delivery, nothing complicated. Why are you asking all these questions, Sarah?" Her voice had a sharp edge to it that I'd rarely heard before, and her hands were trembling slightly as she worked. I pressed on, trying to keep my voice casual. Was I a big baby? Did I cry a lot? You know, just the usual stories mothers tell about their children's births. Mom finally turned to look at me, and I was shocked to see tears in her eyes. You were perfect, Sarah. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. You hardly cried at all. You were just perfect. There was something in the way she said it, a kind of desperate sadness that made my chest tighten with unease. Mom, is everything okay? You seem upset. She wiped her eyes with the back of her gardening glove and forced another smile. I'm fine, honey. Just feeling sentimental, I suppose. Sometimes it's hard to believe how fast time goes by. I left my mother's house more confused than when I'd arrived. Her reaction to my questions had been strange, almost panicked, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something important from me. On impulse, I decided to drive to St. Mary's Hospital and see if I could get any information about my birth records. The hospital's records department was located in the basement, a sterile, fluorescent-lit space that smelled like disinfectant and old paper. The clerk behind the desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, listened patiently as I explained that I needed information about my birth for insurance purposes. I can provide you with basic information, she said, but detailed medical records would require a formal request and proper identification. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot staring at a piece of paper that had changed everything I thought I knew about my life. According to the birth certificate copy, I had indeed been born at St. Mary's Hospital on July 26th. But the document also showed that mine had been a multiple birth twins. One infant had been discharged home with the Mitchell family. The second infant had been transferred to alternate family placement per private arrangement. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I had a twin sister. I had been born as part of a set, and somehow, someway, we had been separated as babies. But who was my twin? And why had my family kept this secret from me for 27 years? As I sat there trying to process this earth-shattering information, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're looking into Emma, aren't you? We need to meet. There are things you need to know about your family that go much deeper than you realize. Meet me at Riverside Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone and don't tell anyone about this message. Someone who knows the truth. I spent the entire night staring at that text message, reading it over and over until I had it memorized. Someone out there knew about Emma and me, knew about the connection I was only beginning to understand. Part of me was terrified to meet this mysterious person, but a larger part of me was desperate for answers. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Riverside Cafe was a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town, the kind of spot where you could have a private conversation without being overheard. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a corner table where I could see everyone who entered. At exactly 2 o'clock, an elderly woman with silver hair and gentle brown eyes walked in, looked around until she spotted me, and made her way over to my table. Sarah, she said softly, settling into the chair across from me. My name is Margaret Rodriguez. I was Emma's grandmother, her adoptive grandmother, I should say. I'm probably the only person left alive who knows the complete truth about what happened to you and Emma 27 years ago. Her voice was warm but serious, and I could see both kindness and deep sadness in her eyes. Emma is my twin sister, isn't she? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Margaret nodded slowly, reaching across the table to take my hand in her weathered ones. Yes, dear, Emma is your twin sister. You were both born to Robert and Nancy Mitchell on July 26, 1996, but you were separated when you were only 6 months old. The cafe seemed to spin around me as Margaret continued her story. Your parents were very young when you were born, and they were struggling financially. Your father had lost his job, and your mother was overwhelmed with caring for twin babies. They made the heartbreaking decision to keep one baby and allow another family to adopt the other. But why Emma and not me? How did they choose? The question came out as barely a whisper, and I could feel tears starting to burn behind my eyes. Margaret squeezed my hand gently before answering. You were born 12 minutes before Emma, which made you the older twin. Your parents decided to keep the firstborn and allow Emma to be adopted by my son and his wife, Carlos and Maria Rodriguez. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a small wooden box, setting it carefully on the table between us. The Rodriguez family were close friends of your parents, and they had been trying to have children for years. When your parents approached them about adopting Emma, they were overjoyed. The plan was for the families to stay in touch, for you and Emma to grow up knowing each other as cousins rather than twins. But something went wrong, I said, and Margaret nodded sadly. When Emma was 3 years old, Carlos and Maria were killed in a car accident. Emma had no other family except your Aunt Linda, who had been named as her guardian in their will. Linda took Emma in and raised her as her own daughter, but she made a decision that changed everything. Margaret opened the wooden box and began pulling out items, old photographs, documents, and what looked like letters. Linda was unable to have children of her own, and she saw Emma as a gift from God. She became obsessed with the idea that Emma was truly her daughter, not just her niece. She was terrified that if Emma ever learned the truth about her biological family, she would leave Linda and return to the Mitchells. The photos Margaret showed me were devastating. There was Emma and me as babies, lying side by side in matching outfits. There were pictures of us together at 6 months old, just days before we were separated. In every image, we looked absolutely identical, two halves of the same whole, torn apart before we could even form memories of each other. Linda made your parents promise never to tell you about Emma's true identity, Margaret continued. She convinced them that it would be better for everyone if the twins grew up believing they were simply cousins. She was so afraid of losing Emma that she was willing to sacrifice the bond between you and your sister to keep Emma all to herself. I felt sick to my stomach as the full scope of the deception became clear. So when Emma and I played together as children, when we celebrated our shared birthday, when everyone joked about how similar we were, Linda knew the whole time that we were twins. Margaret nodded, and I could see tears in her own eyes now. Linda has spent 27 years living with this secret, watching you and Emma together and knowing that she was keeping you from the truth about your relationship. Every family gathering, every birthday party, every moment of connection between you two was torture for her because she knew it could lead to discovery. Margaret pulled out one final item from the box, a small silver bracelet with 2 charms, each engraved with a name. This was made for you and Emma when you were born. Your mother had it commissioned as a way to keep you connected even if you were apart. It says Sarah and Emma, forever sisters. I took the bracelet with trembling hands, running my finger over the engraved names. All these years, I had felt like something was missing from my life, like there was an empty space inside me that I couldn't explain. Now I knew why. I had been living my entire life without the other half of my soul. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked Margaret. "Why didn't you say something years ago?" She sighed deeply, looking older than her years. "I tried, dear." Several times I approached Linda about telling you girls the truth, but she always threatened to cut off all contact with Emma if I said anything. She knew that losing Emma would destroy me, so she used my love for her against me. Margaret leaned forward, her expression becoming more urgent. But Emma is getting married now, starting a new chapter of her life, and I couldn't let her do that without knowing the truth about her family. And when I heard that you hadn't been invited to the wedding, I knew Linda was still trying to keep you two apart. It's time for this deception to end. I sat there for a long moment, trying to process everything Margaret had told me. My entire life had been built on a lie. Emma wasn't my cousin. She was my twin sister, my other half, the person I should have grown up with and shared everything with. And Linda had stolen that from us, keeping us apart out of her own selfish fear of losing Emma. What should I do now? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. Margaret smiled for the first time since we'd begun talking. You should tell Emma the truth. She deserves to know who she really is, and you both deserve to have the relationship you were meant to have. As I was getting ready to leave the cafe, my phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and my heart nearly stopped. Margaret nodded encouragingly, and I answered the call with shaking hands. Sarah, Emma's voice was tearful and urgent. I need to see you right away. I found something in Mom's room, something about you and me. Sarah, I think we might be sisters, real sisters. I met Emma at Laurelhurst Park, the same place where we used to play as children during family gatherings. It felt surreal to be meeting her here now, knowing what I knew, seeing her with completely different eyes. She was sitting on a bench near the pond, clutching a manila envelope to her chest, and when she looked up at me, I could see that she'd been crying. Sarah, she said as I approached, her voice shaky with emotion. I don't even know how to begin this conversation. Yesterday, I was looking for my birth certificate in Mom's filing cabinet because David and I need it for our marriage license, and I found this. She held up the envelope with trembling hands. I sat down beside her, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. What did you find, Emma? She opened the envelope and pulled out a collection of documents and photographs that were nearly identical to what Margaret had shown me the day before. Sarah, look at this. Look at these pictures. The first photograph she handed me showed two babies lying side by side in a hospital bassinet. They were absolutely identical, down to the tiny wisps of hair and the shape of their sleeping faces. This is us, isn't it? Emma whispered. We're twins. We're actual twins, and nobody ever told us. I took the photo with hands that were shaking just as much as hers. Emma, I have to tell you something. I already knew. I found out yesterday. Her eyes widened in shock, and I quickly explained about my trip to the hospital, my conversation with Margaret, and everything I had learned about our separation as infants. Oh my God, Emma breathed, leaning back against the bench as if the weight of this revelation was physically overwhelming her. All these years, all these family gatherings where everyone joked about how we were like twins. We actually are twins. How could they keep this from us? How could Mom keep this from me? We sat there for several minutes in stunned silence, both of us trying to process the magnitude of what we'd discovered. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I always felt like something was missing from my life. I always had this sense that I was incomplete somehow, like there was a part of me that I couldn't access. Now I know why. I felt the same way, I told her, reaching over to take her hand. I never understood why I always felt so alone, even when I was surrounded by family. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was just naturally isolated or antisocial. But it was because my other half was missing. Emma pulled out more photographs from the envelope and we looked through them together. Images of us as babies, as toddlers, always together until suddenly the photos showed only one of us. "Look at this," Emma said, pointing to a photo of herself at around 3 years old. "This is right after my adoptive parents died." I remember Mom Linda taking this picture, but I never understood why I looked so sad. The more we talked, the more similarities we discovered beyond the obvious physical ones. We both had the same recurring dream about playing with another little girl who looked exactly like us. We both had an inexplicable phobia of being separated from people we loved. We both collected vintage cameras and took photographs in the same style. We even had the same nervous habit of chewing on our bottom lip when we were concentrating. "Emma," I said carefully, "there's something else I need to tell you. Margaret Rodriguez told me that your adoptive mother, Linda, she knew the truth all along. She's the one who convinced our parents to keep us apart. She was afraid that if you knew you had a biological family, you would leave her." Emma's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally a kind of resigned understanding. That explains so much about Mom's behavior over the years. Why she always got nervous when you and I spent too much time together. Why she discouraged me from doing ancestry DNA tests or looking into my family history. Why she always seemed to panic whenever I mentioned feeling like I had siblings somewhere. "She's been controlling our entire relationship for 27 years, I said, feeling anger rise in my chest. Every birthday party where we felt that connection, every family gathering where we gravitated toward each other, every moment of friendship we shared, she was watching and probably planning how to keep us from getting too close." Emma stood up abruptly and began pacing in front of the bench. "And the wedding. Oh God, Sarah, the wedding! She convinced me that we should keep it small, that we shouldn't invite extended family. But you're not extended family. You're my twin sister. She deliberately excluded you from my wedding because she was still trying to keep us apart." I could see the fury building in Emma's eyes, and while part of me wanted to share in that anger, I realized that what I wanted more than revenge was simply to have my sister back. "Emma, what if we don't focus on being angry at Linda right now? What if we focus on what we've found? We have each other now. We know the truth." Emma stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a kind of wonder mixed with deep love. "You're right. Sarah, you're my sister, my actual biological twin sister. We've lost 27 years, but we don't have to lose any more time." She sat back down beside me and pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home. "I have an idea," I said when we finally pulled apart. "What if we plan something together? Something that celebrates who we really are and what we've found." I was thinking about having a wedding ceremony of my own, not because I'm getting married to a person, but because I'm marrying myself to the truth. I'm committing to living authentically for the first time in my life. Emma's eyes lit up with understanding. A beach wedding. Something beautiful and meaningful, where we can invite everyone and finally tell them the truth about who we are. She paused, a mischievous smile crossing her face. And we can see how Linda reacts when she realizes that her worst fear is coming true, that we found each other despite everything she did to keep us apart. We spent the next hour planning what would become the most important day of our lives. We would hold the ceremony at Cannon Beach, with its dramatic rock formations and endless ocean views. I would wear a white dress and marry myself in a ceremony about self-love and truth. Emma would be my maid of honor, and together we would reveal our true relationship to our family and the world. "There's one more thing," Emma said as we were preparing to leave the park. "I found something else in Mom's files, a business card for a private investigator. I think she's been having me followed, maybe for years, to make sure I didn't get too close to discovering the truth." She handed me the card, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the investigator's name and phone number. As we walked back to our cars, Emma's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID, and her face went pale. "It's Mom Linda," she said. "Should I answer it?" I nodded, and Emma put the call on speaker so I could hear. "Emma, sweetheart." Linda's voice was strained and anxious. "I need to see you right away. There are some things we need to discuss about your upcoming wedding and about your relationship with Sarah. Can you come home immediately?" Emma and I looked at each other, both realizing that Linda somehow knew we had discovered the truth. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Mom," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. "And Sarah will be coming with me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Linda responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I suppose it's time for all of us to have a conversation." 3 weeks later, I stood on the sand at Cannon Beach, wearing a simple white dress and looking out at the Pacific Ocean as waves crashed against the famous Haystack Rock. The setting was breathtaking, dramatic basalt formations rising from the sea, endless blue sky, and a beach that stretched for miles in both directions. I had chosen this location because it felt like a place where truth could finally be spoken, where the power of nature could witness and bless the reunion that had been 27 years in the making. The confrontation with Linda 3 weeks earlier had been every bit as difficult as I'd expected. When Emma and I arrived at her house together, Linda had taken one look at our faces and known immediately that her secret was out. She had broken down completely, sobbing and begging us to understand that everything she had done was out of love for Emma. "I was so afraid of losing you," she had cried, reaching for Emma's hands. "You were all I had after I found out I couldn't have children of my own. When your adoptive parents died and you came to live with me, I saw it as God giving me the child I had always wanted. I couldn't bear the thought of sharing you with anyone else." Emma had been surprisingly gentle with Linda during that conversation, though I could see the hurt and anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. "Mom, I understand that you love me, and I love you too. But you kept me from my twin sister for 27 years. You robbed us of growing up together, of sharing our childhood, of being there for each other during all the important moments of our lives." Now, as I stood on the beach, waiting for the ceremony to begin, I could see our entire family gathered on the sand behind me. My parents, Nancy and Robert, looked nervous and ashamed, probably wondering how much of their role in the deception would be revealed today. Linda sat in a folding chair looking pale and defeated, while Emma's fiancé David stood nearby looking confused but supportive. Emma appeared at my side wearing a flowing blue dress that complemented the ocean setting perfectly. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, linking her arm through mine. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Everyone will know the truth." "I've been ready for this my entire life," I replied, feeling a sense of calm and certainty I'd never experienced before. I just didn't know what I was getting ready for until now. The officiant I had hired was a local minister who specialized in non-traditional ceremonies. I had explained the situation to her ahead of time, and she had been moved by our story and eager to help us create something meaningful. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the beach. "We are gathered here today to witness something extraordinary, not just a wedding, but a reunion, a revelation, and a celebration of truth." I stepped forward and began the speech I had been rehearsing for weeks. "Family and friends, thank you for being here today. I know the ceremony is unusual, and you're probably wondering why I've asked you all to come to the beach to watch me marry myself. The truth is, I'm not just marrying myself, I'm reuniting with the part of myself that was taken away from me 27 years ago." I could see confusion rippling through the small crowd, and I noticed Linda gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles were white. You see, I recently discovered that I wasn't born alone. I was born as part of a pair, as one half of a set of twins, and my twin sister has been in my life all along, though I never knew our true relationship. Emma stepped forward and took my hand. "I'm Sarah's twin sister," she announced to the gathered crowd. "For 27 years, we believed we were cousins. But we are actually identical twins who were separated as infants and raised apart." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. My mother gasped and began crying, while my father sat down heavily on a piece of driftwood, looking like he'd been punched in the stomach. Linda made a choking sound and buried her face in her hands. Several of our other relatives began talking all at once, their voices mixing together in a chaos of confusion and disbelief. "Please," I called out, raising my hand for silence. "Let us finish." When the beach grew quiet again, I continued. "Emma and I were separated when we were 6 months old because our parents were young and struggling financially. Emma was adopted by the Rodriguez family, and after they died, she was raised by Linda as her daughter." Emma squeezed my hand and picked up the narrative. "What we discovered 3 weeks ago is that Linda knew the truth about our relationship all along. She chose to keep us from knowing we were sisters because she was afraid that if I learned about my biological family, I would leave her." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the sound of the waves seemed muted as everyone processed what they had just heard. Linda finally raised her head and looked at us with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ocean breeze. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting Emma, but I was really just protecting myself." "Linda," I said, stepping toward her, "I don't hate you. I understand that you acted out of fear and love, even though what you did was wrong. But Emma and I have lost 27 years of sisterhood because of decisions that were made without our knowledge or consent. We can't get those years back, but we can make sure we don't lose any more time." Emma moved to stand beside Linda's chair. "Mom, you will always be my mother. You raised me, you loved me, you gave me a wonderful life. But Sarah is my twin sister, and I need to have her in my life as my sister, not just as my cousin. Can you accept that?" Linda reached up and took Emma's hand, nodding through her tears. "I can try, sweetheart. I can try to learn how to share you with the family you were born into." The officiant stepped forward again. Forward. "Sarah and Emma, would you like to exchange vows as sisters?" We had prepared for this moment, and Emma and I turned to face each other, both of us crying now but smiling through our tears. "Emma," I began, "I vow to be the sister to you that I should have been all along. I promise to make up for lost time, to be there for you in all the ways I couldn't be before, and to never let anyone separate us again." "Sarah," Emma replied, "I vow to cherish the sister bond we've rediscovered. I promise to share my life with you completely, to include you in every important moment going forward, and to never take for granted the miracle of finding you again." As we hugged each other tightly, I could hear our family members crying and talking softly among themselves. But there was one more surprise in store. A man I'd never seen before approached our group carrying an official-looking envelope. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I'm looking for Sarah and Emma Mitchell Rodriguez. I'm Thomas Wright, an attorney. I've been searching for you both for several years regarding an inheritance matter, and when I saw the story about your beach wedding online, I realized I had finally found you." Emma and I looked at each other in bewilderment. "An inheritance?" Emma asked. "From whom?" Thomas Wright smiled and opened his envelope. "From your original adoptive parents, Carlos and Maria Rodriguez. They left specific instructions in their will regarding your reunion with your biological family, and they established a trust fund that could only be accessed when you had found each other. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation Thomas Wright had for us. "There's something else," he continued, his expression becoming more serious. "According to the documents I have, you weren't born as twins. You were born as triplets. You have a brother." The beach seemed to spin around me as Thomas Wright's words sank in. Emma grabbed my arm to steady herself, and I could hear gasps of amazement from our family members. "A brother?" I managed to whisper. "Yes," Thomas Wright confirmed. "Your brother was adopted by a family in Canada when you were all 6 months old. His name is now Marcus Blake, and he's been searching for his twin sisters for the past 10 years. He's a doctor in Toronto, and if you're willing, he would very much like to meet you both." 6 months later, I stood in the departure lounge at Portland International Airport, holding Emma's hand as we waited to board our flight to Toronto. The beach wedding video had gone viral, garnering over 50 million views, with the hashtag twin wedding reveal becoming a global phenomenon. But more importantly, it had led to us finding Marcus. Our first video call with Marcus had been surreal and wonderful. When his face appeared on the screen, the family resemblance was unmistakable. He had the same green eyes as Emma and me, the same stubborn chin, the same quick smile. "I always knew I had sisters somewhere," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been searching for you both since I turned 18. The final secret that Marcus revealed wasn't as earth-shattering as we had feared. It turned out that our parents had originally planned to keep all 3 of us. But when Marcus was born with a serious heart defect that required immediate surgery, they made the difficult decision to place him with a family in Canada who had better insurance coverage and access to the specialized cardiac care he needed. When we landed in Toronto, Marcus was waiting for us at the gate, holding a sign that said Sarah and Emma Mitchell. When he hugged us both, it felt like a piece of my soul that I hadn't even known was missing suddenly clicked into place. "This is weird, right?" he said, laughing. "Good weird, but still weird." We spent the next week in Toronto talking for hours every day, sharing stories about our childhoods and trying to fill in the gaps of 27 years apart. We discovered that Marcus had many of the same quirks and interests that Emma and I shared. He was also left-handed, also allergic to shellfish, also had a passion for photography. He even had the same recurring dream about playing with 2 other children who looked exactly like him. On our last night in Toronto, the 3 of us went up to the CN Tower and looked out over the city lights. 6 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was not being invited to a wedding, I began. I felt rejected and alone and like I didn't matter to my own family. But what I've learned is that sometimes the most painful experiences in our lives are actually leading us toward the most beautiful discoveries. Emma wiped tears from her eyes and nodded. "I always felt like I was living someone else's life, like I was playing a role that didn't quite fit. Now I understand why. I wasn't just Emma Rodriguez. I was Emma Mitchell, twin sister to Sarah and triplet sister to Marcus." Marcus put his arms around both of us. "So what happens now? Where do we go from here?" "I think we just start living as the family we were always meant to be," I said. "We make new memories, we create new traditions, and we make sure that nothing ever separates us again." 3 months later, Emma finally had a real wedding, a beautiful ceremony in Portland with David, surrounded by her complete family for the first time in her life. I was her maid of honor, and Marcus flew in from Toronto to walk her down the aisle. Linda was there too, smiling through happy tears. During her speech at the reception, Emma said, A year ago, I thought I was just getting married. But what I've learned is that you can't really start a new chapter until you understand the story that came before it. I've learned that family isn't just about the people who raise you, it's about the people who see you for who you really are and love you anyway. As I listened to Emma speak, I thought about how the story had begun with me feeling excluded, rejected, and alone. But it was ending with all of us together, finally complete, finally whole. The beach wedding that had gone viral wasn't really about getting revenge on the people who had excluded me. It was about refusing to accept that exclusion as the end of my story. And in the end, that determination to seek the truth had given me something far more valuable than any revenge could have provided. It had given me my sister back. It had given me a brother I never knew existed. It had given me a complete understanding of who I was and where I belonged in the world. As Emma and David shared their first dance as husband and wife, with Marcus and me watching from the sidelines, I realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the temporary satisfaction of getting even with someone, but the deep, lasting joy of being surrounded by people who truly knew me and loved me for exactly who I was. The little girl in those old photographs, the one who had been separated from her twin sister before she could even form memories of her, had finally found her way home.